welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Jackie.
And it's me, Diana. Hello.
Oh boy, we are here enjoying these warm, pleasant days of summer where we are, and we're just thinking about all the different things we want to do here. You know, do we want to talk more about behavior analysis and research related to behavior analysis, which is the point of this podcast? Do we want to go to the beach? Do we want to study something totally different, like insect behavior maybe? Or do we want to take a trip? There's just so many things to do, so much variety out there. And of course,
you know what they say, variety is the spice of life.
I think you might.
I don't know if you ever heard that. I think I might have come up with that.
That's a good phrase. You should write that one down. Copyright you.
I'm going to keep that one in my back pocket.
Trademark. Put it on a bumper sticker. That's good. But of course, on this show, anytime we have a topic and we say, you know what? I bet there's someone brilliant out there who can talk about it very, very well for the whole episode that we want to record. We go out and we find that person, and we have them. We have them here in the virtual studio. We're joined by Dr. Matthew Normand. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk with us about this variety of topics. A topic.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. It's a good way to spend a summer morning talking about spicy things.
All right, so let's get into our favorite spices. I like cumin. Wait,
smells like feet.
Oh, it does? Okay. I like cumin, so I don't think it smells it. But anyway, let's get back on topic. We're going to be talking about variety in ABA. So we should stay on the topic, even though the topic is a lot of topics potentially. So we're going to be talking about variety in the field. What does that mean? How do we build it? Are there places that we should or should not venture in our quest for variety and all these different spices? To do that, we're going to have 3 articles that we'll be discussing, as well as Matt's expert opinion. And of course, he wrote one of these articles, so this is going to make it easier for him. So Diana, what are our 3 articles that we'll be discussing?
All right, I'm ready to tell you. The first one is titled ABA from A to Z, Behavior Science Applied to 350 Domains of Socially Significant Behavior, which, for the record, I think is probably the most listicle journal title in ABA.
Number 282 will surprise you.
And that was written by Heward, Critchfield, Reed, Dietrich, and Kimball, published in Perspectives on Behavior Science. But what year? 2022. Then, Come On In, the Water's Fine. Achieving Mainstream Relevance Through Integration with Primary Medical Care. That's by Friman, published in the Behavior Analyst 2010. And then to round it out, Don't Wag the Dog. Extending the Reach of Applied Behavior Analysis by Normand and Kohn, the Behavior Analyst 2013.
All right. So we've got 350 topics to discuss. So let's get started. We don't have a lot of time. So Matt, before we get into our discussion of variety in our field, for listeners who aren't aware of your work, why don't you give us a little bit of background information about yourself?
So I guess to preface everything, I've devoted literally my entire adult life to behavior analysis. Well, I mean, the professional part of my life and probably like 40% of my personal life, adult life to behavior analysis. I discovered it accidentally very early on. And I wanted to preface this by saying that because I'm a fan. I feel strongly about our field, and I believe we're doing many good things. And I say that because I think based on where the conversation will go, we might be critical at times in this conversation about certain things that we've done or do, and that's okay. You know, no field is perfect. So first and foremost, I'm a fan. And I'm a fan because I grew up in Massachusetts, and I went to what is now Western New England University. At the time, it was Western New England College, right down the road from where I grew up. And I stumbled out of high school. I was not a stellar student. I had a decent track record before high school, but I kind of went off the rails in high school in terms of academics. I didn't know much about college. I was told I should go, and a few colleges were suggested to me, including Western New England, which I had never seen, even though I grew up 10 minutes away from it. And so I visited campuses, and I finally saw Western New England, and I loved it. I thought, wow, this is a beautiful campus. It just, all the superficial things. I didn't know anything about the academics, but I was like, well, this is beautiful. I want to go there. And that was fortunate because it was the only school that accepted me. So I'm glad I decided I wanted to go there. But it was I think, the best coincidence that could have happened, because I had to declare a major going in. The only class I really liked at all in high school was a half-year course in psychology, mostly because we had a student TA and she was pretty cool. And then actually the main teacher of the class was a very laid-back guy who was very cool. And about all I remembered from the class actually was Pavlov's dogs. And I don't remember what I remembered, but I remembered Pavlov's dogs. And so I declared psychology as a major going into college, but not because I thought deeply about it. And that meant I got assigned a psychology advisor during summer orientation before my freshman year to help me get a schedule together. And that was Hank Schlinger. And I think probably most people know who Hank Schlinger is. There were only 4 faculty in the department at the time. It was a very small school. And 2 of them were behaviorists, Hank and then Dennis Kolajewski, who's a behavior therapist. And so Hank was really the first person I met, and I thought he was cool because he was wearing Tevas and a Dallas Cowboys t-shirt, and he had a goatee and long hair at the time. You know, he's bald now, so you probably would think that's funny if you know him. But he was cool. He asked me a lot of questions about my background and how high school was, and he made the decision. He said, "Listen, I think I get it. This first semester, I need to put you with the best teachers I can. Don't worry about the subjects. I want you to get the best teachers, including me." So he put me in his intro psych class. And if memory serves, that met on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 a.m. And I think it was the first class I ever attended in college. And he spent the whole first day telling us why the class was designed the way that it was and what we should do to be successful in the class. And I remember I listened during orientation. I said, so I'm supposed to sit in the front row to do well. So I was sitting in the front row listening to him. And I remember looking at the book, which was the Orange Book, we called it at the time. It was the intro book by Poling, Schlinger, Starren, and Blakely. I forget the order of authorship. Introduction to Scientific Psychology. It was basically an intro textbook from a behavior analytic perspective. And so I decided I'm going to do this. He wrote the book. He must know what he's talking about. I'm going to do everything he says in this class and all my other classes. So I did that. I went from stumbling out of high school to graduating with a 3.98 because of what Hank Schlinger told me. But so my first introduction by accident was to behavior analysis. That's what I knew of psychology. That was all that was presented to me, really. And it was a coherent approach to psychology from the majority of my classes because I took them with Dennis Kolajewski and Hank Schlinger. So I had no choice, right? That was really what was presented to me, but it worked. It made sense to me, and the things that I did were effective. So I never looked back. That was it to me. And they changed my life at that school because I didn't even really know what graduate school was. I certainly had no aspirations of getting a PhD ever. And they really put me down that path. In my second year, I think it was too, Hank said, you should do an internship. And so I ended up doing an internship kind of at Riverside Industries in East Hampton, Massachusetts, which was a sort of a day facility for adults with developmental disabilities. And the person who was the consultant there was Dave Palmer. So I got to meet Dave Palmer as a very young student, not a bad person to meet. Dave's one of the kindest people you could ever meet, one of the most brilliant people you could ever meet. And it turned out to be mostly Fridays with Dave. That was my internship, was sort of sitting in that office and talking about behavior analysis and learning who the people were and what the ideas were. And it was wonderful. And so all of my undergraduate experience was really in the experimental analysis of behavior, though, and the conceptual analysis. And Hank and Dave encouraged me to go to Western Michigan University. And they said, you should work in Al Poling's lab and spend as much time and take as many classes as you can with Jack Michael. So that's what I did. And I went there, and it was like Shangri-La. You know, it was the most wonderful place for a behaviorist at the time. And I just ate it up. And it really wasn't until probably my second semester there that I really even knew there was such a thing as applied behavior analysis. Up until that point, for me, it was all Skinner, rats, pigeons, that's what I was interested in. That's what really drew me into the field for the most part. And then there was one morning, and he probably doesn't remember it, but it was a cold Michigan morning. I got early to campus going into the lab, and Al Poling had pulled in about the same time. And there was an article that had come out in the American Psychologist about jobs for psychologists. And for an experimental psychologist, right, which EAB would be in that domain, a very small part of it. The moral of the story was basically there are no jobs if you're an experimental psychologist. You're never going to get hired. You're never going to get an academic position. And Al was like, basically, wow, sucks for you. Because if you can't get a job as an experimental psychologist, you're not getting a job as someone who does the experimental analysis of behavior. You should do something applied. And so with that and some of the other folks there, like John Austin, they encouraged me to look at different places like Florida State University with John Bailey. And one of the things that attracted me at that point in my life about Florida State, other than the weather, was I was just beginning to realize, mostly because of Jack Michael, because I remember the first day of Jack's class, it might have been his verbal behavior class, actually. He sort of stopped and looked at all the students and said, you all need to be a little more humble, because you might like to think that you got here because you surveyed the landscape of psychology and made an informed decision about what the best approach to psychology was. And this is no, you didn't. You ran into someone who shaped you into this. You should thank whoever the people were that you knew, and that's certainly true in all of our cases, certainly in my case. But I started to realize that I've only ever had behavior analysis. So I've read a lot and heard a lot from behavior analysts about what psychologists do and how they do it and what they think. And I started to realize it might be good to actually go study with those psychologists for a bit and hear it from them rather than the filter through behavior analysis. And except for John Bailey, Florida State was really, there was a CBS area, cognitive, behavioral, social, but it was really dominated by cognitive and social. And so in my PhD career, I mostly took seminars from very prominent cognitive and social psychologists. I think that was useful. It didn't change my mind at all. I think it was a pretty accurate depiction that I got. But I also learned, and this might really influence our discussion today, several of the faculty there who were cognitive or otherwise turned out to be very good mentors and very reasonable people, including Anders Ericsson, who passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a presidential scholar speaker at ABAI a few years back and everything. And Anders was very bright, very kind, and very amenable to much of what we do in behavior analysis. But that experience formally exposed me to a variety of things in psychology and people actually in psychology. So I think that had a strong influence on the things that I did later. So that I'll stop there, but that's kind of getting me through my PhD anyways, and giving me, at least at the end, that experience in mainstream psychology. Because really, I think I took 2 classes, behavioral classes at Florida State. That's what John Bailey taught at the time. So everything else in my graduate program and all my committee members, for the most part, were cognitive psychologists.
So, Matt, when we talk about, today's topic, we're talking about variety in the field of ABA. I mean, was some of that sort of a reflection of just the variety? When you talk about psychology, define psychology. Oh, stuff with brains and behavior. You could do anything you want. Sometimes you look at like a psychology journal and you're like, what don't they write about? Or what haven't psychologists written a book about? I mean, was it sort of a reflection of how come we don't have that in our own field of behavior analysis? Or was there something else that sort of got you feeling that this is something you wanted to write about? You wanted to post a YouTube video all about, variety, which was the first thing I know when we were preparing for this episode was I watched that video, your video on variety and where's our variety in our field.
Interesting. My motivation for that video is a little bit different. So I'll explain that. But I guess to back up a little bit, I think this is not a news flash, but our field is a little peculiar. And that raises some interesting issues. And my views have evolved over the years. We all do. I think at different parts in our professional development, appropriately, we're concerned with different things And so different variables influence our behavior. So my views have changed over the years. And I'll say at the outset that part of the motivation for my video that you're referring to it was sort of responding to people like I used to be, the things I used to say. I'm sort of yelling at myself. So I'll explain that in a second. But, our field has developed. I still think, and Skinner sort of felt this way as well. We are part of psychology. I think really we should be psychology. Now, there are disagreements. There's no right answer about that. Some people think, maybe in the grand scheme, behavior analysis is better situated at an end of the continuum of biology, as sort of as the whole behaving organism. But really, as we've evolved, from any outside perspective, it looks like what we're doing fits into psychology. The unfortunate part is we are not psychology. We are a piece of psychology, and psychology is a huge eclectic field, really, at the end of the day. So that creates some problems for us. And it plays into this why variety becomes a focal point. The way that I think it is, behavior analysis, behaviorism, broadly, I think is the physics of maybe psychology, which means what we study, just like if you go and you become an engineer, you have to know all about physics, or at least those physics as they pertain to the work that you do. And physics is not an eclectic field. It's a coherent discipline built on basic principles over long periods of time. We don't have that luxury. In an ideal world, all of the fields that deal with behavior, including human behavior, those practitioners would have a strong basis in the experimental analysis of behavior. But they don't. Instead, behavior analysis has become this weird little field that tries to get in everywhere from the outside. It's like, oh yeah, we do education too. Oh yeah, we do public health. Oh yeah, we do this. And people, I think rightly, who aren't otherwise familiar, look and say, who the hell are these people? Right? They have the answers to everything, right? They're everything to everybody. They know it all. But I think because of the way it developed, it might sound arrogant that we're the physics of psychology, right? But I think that's really the case. We're not as advanced as a basic science as physics is, but I think that's where things got weird. So the variety shows up differently. It's like, yeah, education, healthcare, sports, fitness, all of these different things we should be involved in is odd because it's just, we're part of it because our basic science underlies it all. But now we're sort of in a position to try to make inroads in all of these areas that have proceeded without us as their foundation. So I think that's peculiar. At the end of the day, I think really to be successful, and Murray Sidman said this to me many years ago, just talking to him at a conference. He said, if we really want to make change, behavior analysts have to become teachers. They have to become CEOs. They can't knock on the door from the outside and try to influence everything that these professionals do. They have to be those professionals. But that's a tall order because they have to go through all of the training then necessary to understand behavior analysis and understand the profession to be a part of. But having said that, why the video on variety? Here's what I was actually responding to. And again, I've been guilty of this, but I think over time you gain some perspective. I hear so many people at conferences, in symposia, in the hallway, and I read things in our journals where people are arguing behavior analysis needs to do this if we're going to get anywhere, needs to do this if we're going to survive, needs to do this if we save the world. And that video is really me trying to explain we don't need to do any one thing. There is no one right way. There is no one right answer. I mean, there are constraints within the realm of good science and practice. But so, for example, behavior analysis needs to address problems of real social significance that reside under the dome. I've made that argument, and I think we do. But it doesn't mean that's all we have to do. It doesn't mean that we don't need people asking the most basic questions about schedule parameters and schedules of reinforcement. We need those people too, right? We have a paper coming out about jargon, the effect of jargon on treatment acceptability. Has been written about that, and recently Derek Reed and Tom Critchfield and colleagues have published a series of papers. And a lot of people have made very strong statements about, we need to talk differently because it's impacting the acceptability of our science and practice. I don't know actually that the evidence supports that, actually. I'm not sure it's how we say things. I think it's what we're saying. The things we're describing aren't always palatable. But I would argue, yes, we do need some people who can speak to everybody, who can just speak in general terms. But we also need a lot more Jack Michaels who are so sophisticated in their use of our language. And we need all of that because that's what goes into a robust science and practice. We need to study things outside of the Skinner box. We need a new Skinner box. We do. And we need a hell of a lot more work in the Skinner box too. And that's what I was getting at. We don't need to do any one thing. If we work on restricting the range of our practices, I think that's a recipe for failure. The bottom line is we need more of everything. We need more people doing all sorts of things at all levels. We need people who are going kind of boldly beyond the data, maybe to the chagrin of some people. Like those claims are unsupported. If everybody did that, we'd be in trouble. But if some people do that, that's okay, right? Then we need the super cautious people too, who are unwilling to speculate at all, maybe about what the implication of this is. That's okay too. We need that as well. So that really is why I made that video.
A diversely woven tapestry is stronger for our field.
Right. And any field doing only one thing is going to be in trouble, I think, and doing things only one specific way. Again, within constraints. I'm not suggesting that what diversity means is we also go out, start asking people, what the contingencies of reinforcement for their behavior are and seeing if they differ from a control group of dogs or something like that. I mean, that's not reasonable, but within reason.
I think that I also struggle with this as a professor because my students will sometimes say, I want more, applied examples that fit specifically to the population that I work with. And certainly we do plenty of that too, but I'm not here just to teach you how to work with this one population. I'm here to teach you about the science of human behavior and all of the, conceptually systematic pieces of that so that you can then take this information that you have and apply it in a variety of settings. And I think that if we are tailoring it too tightly to just those types of examples and one particular population of clinical work that we do, that we may be not preparing students well if they are looking to go outside the field. And yet the research that we have, so much of it's a circular thing because then we present research that's with one population and trying to teach people how to work with other populations is a struggle.
Yes, I agree with that. I think, though, the profession has developed so rapidly, and not unlike psychology. I mean, Skinner criticized psychology for this in the early 20th century as progressing far more rapidly as a practice than as a science. And I think we sort of, stalled that a little bit in our field because early on everything was EAB. But as soon as practice really started clicking, it exploded. And the basic science has, if it hasn't decreased, it at least hasn't grown at the rate practice has. So now we've got a system set up, understandably. I'm not criticizing the BACB or anything else. I get why it had to happen, or probably had to happen the way that it did. We've got this professional system set up with master's degree programs producing people who are the highest credentialed people in the field, basically, for all intents and purposes, because the distinction at this point between a BCBA and a BCBA-D is not great. That could change. Wow, 2 years? Really? You're talking about 2 years to teach someone everything that they would need to know to go out and be a competent practitioner? I mean, would you be happy if your physician had 2 years of training? I mean, there's serious problems in the medical field with all of the training that they get. There's still, things to be left to be desired. So I don't know. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, how do you balance that? Because if you just spend the 2 years teaching them the basic science, that's going to be problematic when they get out too, because they need to know how to actually work in the field and do things. But if you just teach that, they're going to be dinosaurs to some extent when they graduate if they don't continue their education because they only know the things that they did. And I'll say this, I see it, social media, Facebook and everything else, you see people posting. I know that lots of my colleagues don't appear to have a really strong scientific training because I see the things they post about everything else in their life. And I see pseudoscience everywhere. I'm like, really? So are you a behavior analyst in the sense that you understand standards of evidence and interpretation of research and everything else, or is it dogmatic, right? You learned Cooper, Heron, and Heward, and this is because this is what behavior analysis is, but you don't know why behavior analysis is that way, because I see people apparently not applying those standards of evidence and that critical analysis to other areas of their life. So they're posting things that are absolutely bogus, that have been absolutely dismissed in the scientific research. And they're doing these things in their personal lives and everything else. So I think that speaks to what you're talking about. They missed that, but I think they missed it because they had to learn all of this other stuff too, so that they could go practice when they were done with a master's degree. I don't know how you address that.
Is that sort of just to be expected if we as a field want to practice more variety? Because you bring up a great point. I think it's in some of the articles of it's not as simple as we just need to get people ready for jobs better. It's not as simple as we just need to make everyone better science oriented practitioners of human behavior. You kind of have to do all of it, and you have to do it quickly, and you have to do it in a way that anyone wants to pay for the service, because like you said, it's great. You had so many great academic experiences, but there's a parallel universe where you're like, no, I'm sticking to the research with the pigeons and the rats. And you found yourself in student loan debt, unhirable, becoming a manager at the local Walmart because there was like no other option for you given your education. I mean,
you can make a good career at Walmart.
Oh, I mean, you certainly. I'm not knocking it as a career choice, but it wouldn't have been the one that you prepared all those years for. I mean, is it a matter of more time? Is it a matter of we just need to think about maybe change the paradigm of how we think about training in behavior analysis to be more a part of these fields? I mean, what do you think?
Well, one thing that I've come to appreciate is I don't know. I think when you're young, you're arrogant. I'm not especially bright and intelligent. I don't have answers. I'll tell you what, Jim Carr is one of the brightest people I know. I trust Jim's judgment in just about everything. And those people that are sitting on the BACB board of directors, I mean, for the most part, those are some of the brightest people I know. They don't know the answer either. If they don't know the answer, I don't know what to say. Time could help. But time will have costs in other ways, right? So the longer you require people to train, the fewer people are going to train, right? And the fewer people you're going to be putting out to work in those jobs that exist right now to help people who need help right now. And I knew this from the start, I've had the fortune of being in the ivory tower. That's what I always wanted. I can spend my days reading obscure, scientific papers, conceptual papers, and pondering what they mean and having Zoom conversations with Dave Palmer for 2 hours about, all sorts of conceptual things. And I can do it. Most of the field can, right? 7% of the people who are card-carrying behavior analysts are in practice. They don't have that luxury. So the solutions aren't apparent to me how you fix that problem. It would be, I think, and it might get there. I think to some extent having a professional system where at least doctoral level people are the lead, and there has to be supervision and sign off. That has costs as well in terms of the robustness of our practice with billing and everything else. But at least that could create a system that supports the growth of doctoral level education. And time does buy you the opportunity to focus more on the basic science, I think. 2 years, I don't know that you can. And I don't know that it would be beneficial honestly, to spend 2 years teaching people about the basic science, but then spitting them out into a system where they're supposed to do practice. I don't know that that's the right answer.
So I think to kind of come back to sort of the central conceit of our discussion here. If I were, oh, thank you all, you've nominated me the king of ABA. Oh, and my first initiative is I'm going to put...
I like how you're the king in other places.
The king of ABA. I'm really going to because the king, I need the power to, I'm going to force every field in the world to have a behavior analyst, a BCBA, maybe some BCBADs. They have to have one on their board of directors, or they have to have one working in the management team, or they have to have one at every kind of level of their organization. And I called you up. I said, Matt, I did it. I got us in every field known to man. Would you then say, great, Rob, you did it. We got variety in ABA? Or would we still be looking at, okay, that's good. You just have a bunch of BCBAs who are like hanging out with all these fields. We haven't really solved kind of the central question that we're coming up here. I mean, is it variety just to say we have a bunch of behavior analysts who work with multidisciplinary teams in multiple fields? Is that a part of it? Or is that sort of missing the point of what we're really looking at, like robust variety in ABA?
I think we can look at variety. Well, we could look at it in multiple ways, but we could look at it primarily in two ways, maybe for our conversation. One is variety in applied behavior analysis in terms of the problems we address, right? And so that also includes the settings in which those problems typically reside and the people who are experiencing those problems. Or we could look at the way we also approach behavior analysis. And I'm interested in both. And so that article from 2013, Don't Wag the Dog, is more about applied behavior analysis and the problems we address. The video that I posted really is more about within our own field, how we do the experimental analysis of behavior in applied behavior analysis. So what you're talking about is really that applied area. And I think that's going to be a slow growth, probably, because you're always dealing with that chicken or egg thing. We need to develop competence in these different areas, and we actually need to develop some solutions, some things that work in those areas. But people aren't going to put in the time to do that if they're not going to get paid to do that, because you need jobs, right? You need to be gainfully employed. And the reality today, it's not a bad thing, is that that's mostly in autism and developmental disabilities. That's where really well-paying jobs are. And this sometimes I think gets lost by people who are always criticizing us for not being more diverse. Those are important jobs too. Let's not, let anybody walk away thinking because they work in autism and developmental disabilities that they're doing the wrong thing. No, we can't even meet that demand, right? I love Pat Friman's, standard distribution, and we're working in that tail metaphor, but we can't even fill that tail, right? There is so much need there, and behavior analysts are doing so much good work. That's important, and those are where the jobs are. No matter what people's training, even my students who we usually do health and wellness, they all end up working in that field. Why? Because they can get a job. If you want to work in another area, you're going to have to be entrepreneurial. And that's scary, right? If you have two levers and one pays off on a pretty rich FR1 and the other one's like a ER 7000, which one are you going to press? Our science tells us which one we're going to press. It's really tough.
Sometimes it does feel like, like your article and Pat Friman's article, sort of, where it's sort of like, here's how you could break into these fields is kind of the basics. Like how do these fields connect easily or more easily to your study of behavior analysis. It sort of feels like when you read about entrepreneurs of like the early 20th century where they were like, I don't know, they were selling dog sleds up in Alaska and then they struck it rich in gold. They're just doing all these things and they just happen to get lucky. But those are like the four giant, billionaires we read about in like a history book, whereas most people who did that probably ended up, getting eaten by a bear or something like whatever happened back then in the early 1900s. It just feels like you'd have to do that sort of little bit of everything and just hope for the best. Hope.
You should listen to How I Built This, with Guy Raz.
Oh, you told me about that show.
It's all about entrepreneurs who like made it happen. It's inspiring, but it's also, all of them have a story where initially I was going to go broke. And then one thing happened and I was able to turn it around.
Yeah, and all I learned from those stories is, wow, I don't want to be that. It would be nice to be that person, but I bet there's 8,000 episodes they could publish of. And then I did go broke and I got a real job,
I think your point is we still don't have a clear roadmap for how someone who wants to branch outside of autism is going to be able to do so with the current degrees that they have and with surety that they're going to find a job. And there's a few papers out there that lay out a way in which one could do that, but not with any sort of level of certainty. And Matt, do you think that could change in the future if we have more examples of that, more people try to make inroads as far as established training programs in this variety of applied areas or not?
Yeah, so I think this is another case where variety becomes important. I think academics can play a big role in this. Increasingly, this becomes less the case. But still, in academia, you have a good bit of freedom, more so than you do out in the real world, so to speak, to pursue research questions and things like that don't necessarily have to produce an immediate financial gain. Again, that's changing. So we need people doing that. One of the things that I struggle with, if I have a master's program that I work in, if I want to send students to a doctoral program, most of my students want to do, for example, health and wellness or things like that. Where do they go? There aren't many training programs that focus on those things. So we need more of those. We need models for students to see of people working in those areas. But we do also need people out on the street doing the work as well, who might hire those people and also show how to develop a living doing those things. We need all of that stuff going on, and it's tough. It's a tricky thing to develop. In the 2013 paper and in some of the talks I've given since, my approach is to try to make those concurrent schedules. The autism lever is an FR1 maybe. At least bring the alternative lever down from a VR 7000 to like a VR 500 or something, right? So that maybe there's something there. I don't think we can do better than that right now. And so my approach has been to try to find those areas. And this isn't a great thing because find those areas where the actual requirements to be a professional are low. Don't really guarantee that you're competent at all. That's not good. But those things do still exist, that you could become as much a certified professional as anybody else doing that thing without a lot of extra work beyond what you've already put in to become a competent behavior analyst. But I think it's going to be a slow process, but we sort of need to bootstrap our way up, right? So there are some people out there doing sort of health coaching who are behavior analysts. I think of Julie Slowiak and Nick Green and people like that. But those are small. Ideally, we want to get some people who are successful enough that they might be able to hire a couple of behavior analysts actually to work with them. And there's a job for those people. And then maybe a couple more. And then maybe they split off and make their own company. And now each company, it's going to be that slow kind of progress, I think.
All right, why don't we take a quick break? And when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion all about variety in applied behavior analysis. We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Hey everybody, sorry to stop the conversation midstream, but I want to make sure that all of our listeners are able to get the first secret code word. Secret code word, you might say? What's that for? Well, every episode of ABA Inside Track is ACE approved, and by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening to the episode, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, and click on Get CEUs. You can also click the direct link in the show notes or the podcast player notes in your app, and that will take you to a page where you can enter in these secret code words. We have 2 of them. I'm going to give you the first one now, and you'll be able to earn that learning credit. The first code word, courtesy of our special guest, Dr. Matthew Normand, is pancakes. Pancakes. It's that delicious breakfast treat. You could put maple syrup on it. You could put a lot of butter on it. You could put fake syrup if you're some kind of monster, but you should probably put real pure maple syrup on there to have a delicious carb-filled breakfast. Pancakes. All right, now let's get back to our conversation with Dr. Normand about variety. If we're talking about, variety in the field, we're sort of at the point now where it's less about, and here's the answer for tomorrow versus like, here's how we're going to, slowly put the rockets on the asteroid. So over the next 5 years, it won't crash into Earth, because we just need to change that trajectory a little bit. That's more where we are right now. Like there's not going to be the, I guess anyone could go out and say, I'm a great behavior analyst and I'm jumping into the field of, I don't know, what would be a,
Dentistry.
No, just kidding. I don't know.
Not dentistry. Don't do that.
That might not be a bad extension, though. How many parents of children with disabilities hate going to the dentist? You could be a dentist who has express training in that, or make a cottage industry of training dentists in good behavior packages.
That's the key, though, is that you need training in another area.
Mm.
Right.
And so you get in through your additional training, and then after you've proven yourself effective, you say, oh, guess what? I'm a behavior analyst also, and that's why I'm so effective. I'm using these techniques.
Surprise! I was a behavior analyst all along. You thought I was a dentist, but I'm not.
Let's not overlook, too, that this exists even with our success stories, right? So I think it's very worthwhile for us to listen to the criticism of our field from those outside of the field. And one of the criticisms has been for a long time, and I think this is getting louder, most behavior analysts work in autism and developmental disabilities. Let's just pick autism as one of the main areas. And very few of them have ever taken a class on autism or any other developmental disabilities. That's not part of the curricula. That is bizarre. That is absolutely bizarre from any reasonable vantage point outside of our field, that you would not, if that's going to be your area of practice, that you would not have a rigorous curriculum regarding that diagnosis to go work with that population or whatever population it is. We need to be competent where we work with the people with whom we work, even right now in the areas that we've been successful. So I don't think it's any different. It just opens up a can of worms, right? Because we could plug the autism, developmental disabilities course or courses in our curriculum. But if we're talking broadly now, how do you get every conceivable course in that curriculum, right? Well, I want to do this, so I need this. You've got to sort of work with other disciplines at that point to start that process. So maybe having a little customization option in these graduate programs at universities that have the resources, right? Where if this is where you want to go, well, now you're going to have 3 classes that are in this department because that's really the department that's relevant to what you're doing. And of course, the classroom isn't the end all be all. I mean, that's not going to make you competent, but it's a start to help you at least get up to speed with what's going on in those areas.
Yeah, we've had a lot of students that have been interested in working with organizations, right? We don't have that sort of class at our university. So we're like following, like going like, oh, look, you can take these additional classes for your OBM certificate at FIT or Buena Vista Ventures. They have an OBM certificate, then they're like, we have to do more class. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, you'll have to do more class anywhere if you're going to do something that no one is doing, right? So I think it's just making that known, right? That you're not just over. You don't just get your master's and then your learning life is over. Like if you're going to do something different, then you need to do something different, right? Learn something new.
Behavior analysis is not a degree in special education. Like we can apply what we know about learning to situations where learning is difficult, right? But that's not what the degree is in. So to me, it makes sense the way you're describing, Matt, that there's a core set of classes that we take that are about the principles of behavior and the science of human learning or learning. And then after that, you add on your concentration area for what you then plan to do with your degree afterwards. If it's organization, if it's gerontology, if it's ASD, if it's health and wellness, right? We don't currently have that model. And like you're describing, the focus and the need for ASD services has driven the direction of the field. But we should be able to use our degrees in a multitude of ways as long as we have the proper training and we're not outside of our scope of competence. So, similar social services fields, OT and SLP, like their fieldwork placements are, well, number one, not paid places, right? And number two, they rotate through them so that they're getting a variety of different experiences. And that's built into the education that's being provided to them, that they have this, while they're underneath someone's wing, they can see what it's like to work in this and this area and receive training in that. And in our field, that level of variety is not usually available for fieldwork placements. And there's a different driver there.
That's true. And for a reason I want to talk about in a second here, which kind of, I think, jumps to a question that you sent me a little bit later. But again, I don't have the answer, so I'm just throwing this out here. And I'm sure that the wiser people have thought these things through and it doesn't work. But that's why maybe a doctoral level credential, more on a medical school kind of model, might be helpful, where master's level people aren't going to have the time to do, multiple rotations or whatever through things. But maybe, like to get an MD, to get the PhD and the credential, you've got to go through multiple rotations, and then physicians end up specializing, but they have to have some experience generally in the practice. And maybe that's the model at that level. Still, the majority of your people are going to be master's level practitioners, right? That's what's going to drive the field, because that's kind of the way it seems to play out in the helping professions. But you still need a critical mass of people who have the terminal degree and have had the opportunity to do all of those things. Now, here's the trick, and this is getting at that other question that you sent. We don't have the answers yet. So what solutions do we have to offer the world outside of autism and developmental disabilities? Not sure we have many, if any. And so some personal experience, this was many years ago now. I was, for a fairly brief period of time, the chair of the public relations committee at the Association for Behavior Analysis. This was a long time ago. They had created this position trying to disseminate our science. And, part of my responsibility was to field inquiries from journalists who were writing about all sorts of things about the world, public health issues, gun violence, whatever it was. And so, it wasn't necessarily a flood of inquiries, but, when people somehow stumbled across the organization and got my name, they would say, hey, who can we talk to about X? That was a tricky one. Yeah. Who do you talk to in our field? We have lots of people who talk about things, talk about how we're relevant to X, Y, and Z. But what the journalist wants is someone with a lengthy research record showing how you do this thing. Here's the solution to this problem. We don't have those people outside of autism and developmental disabilities. I know firsthand. The people that we have that have gotten known for things, for the most part, don't stand up to scrutiny by a journalist or anybody on the outside. It's like they published 3 papers with 7 participants ever in their career on this topic. That's not an expert on this. We don't have success. We did it in early intervention. And this happy confluence of events came together, right? We had something that worked because it had started early on under the radar. So by the time, for example, Lovas was at UCLA, which is a prominent place, doing a comprehensive program, working with kids with a certain diagnosis, a lot of the individual pieces had been worked out in our research literature that people didn't even pay attention to. And it was so successful, right, that parents advocated for it, right? Catherine Maurice's book had a big impact, it seems, because there was a solution that was obvious, that when these kids were involved in these programs, the changes to the people who were invested in it were almost miraculous. And yes, they got out there and they made sure that they had access to them and that other people did. And then it was at a point, too, for all that you can criticize about these studies, the Lovas group published larger group studies that had flaws, as all studies do, but they spoke to the deployment of this in a program and how well it would be expected to work, understanding that when you deploy something on larger scales, it's not going to be perfect, right? And you're going to have a lot of noise in the system, and you still want to be able to see what good can you expect to come from it, right? And so they have those data, and it all beautifully came together. And it's not without, again, criticism, and it's not without bumps in the road. But that happened. We don't have that anywhere else. So someone comes and says, oh, right, behavior analysts, they know how to solve water conservation. Really? We do? What solution do we have for that? We have data for. We have ideas about that. We have 4 studies. I made that number up, but most of them are from 1978 and Steve Hayes. That's not impressive. So we need solutions. If we found a solution, I think it might take a little while. People would find us. We wouldn't need to have public relations boards and everything else to try to convince people that we're good people doing good work. If it works, people want it. All right. I think the closest we are to that is contingency management for substance abuse. And, it's now, in government policies. The Biden-Harris administration has specifically mentioned it. I think Bethany Rafe had bean counted, and in the latest policy report, the actual term referring to our contingency management programs appears 12 times in it. That's close. Here in California, Governor Newsom, contingency management has become the promoted treatment for folks with substance abuse problems. That's close. That's getting there because it's just so damn effective. It's not even debatable now. It's the most evidence-based psychosocial intervention for substance abuse disorder in existence. There's nothing else that comes close to it. So maybe we're there. Although, as you get into the policy stuff, things can go wrong, just like was going on with the autism. Okay, so everybody gets ABA for autism, but they get it at 4 hours a week. Well, then it's not going to do much, and then people are going to think less of that intervention. The same thing's happening with contingency management. If I'm remembering correctly, I believe it's like $75 a year they can pay in incentives to an individual in a contingency management. Well, that's absurd, right? That's going to do nothing. The magnitude of that is so below what has been demonstrated in the literature. So what you run the risk of there, this policy gets carried out, people use CM in a way that's not going to be effective, and then CM gets tossed aside as ineffective when it wasn't done properly. But still, I think that's one of the areas we're closest to a tipping point where maybe that becomes the thing. And then maybe if it goes with substance abuse, maybe then people start to get hip to the way it's been used in physical activity for health and wellness, for, healthy eating and those kinds of programs, and a variety of other areas, smoking cessation, diabetes management, all of that stuff could come along with it. But other than that, I'm kind of at a loss. Maybe another close thing, low-hanging fruit, and this entrepreneurially might work out well too, direct instruction. Janet Twyman last year she published a wonderful paper in Perspectives on Behavior Science. I think it's called The Evidence is in the Design, where she reviews all of the literature supporting the use of direct instruction. I think, because it's the Wild West in terms of doing it, behavior analysts starting tutoring companies to compete with those big ones that are out there, right? We do have a research base to draw from for that. And I think you can make some pretty bold guarantees, kind of like Kent Johnson at Morningside Academy have done, and things like, hey, money back guarantees and stuff. If your kid comes this number of times a week, we're going to guarantee this kind of progress. And I think you can feel pretty good doing that with the research base. If enough of that happens, maybe that's another area. I don't think we're going to break into mainstream education. That's a monolith. Right. We've tried that. We've been in the mix. We've been thrown out of the mix. We've been back in. But the smaller scale stuff that actually impacts the people individually, you start being effective, parents are going to advocate for that. They see their kids going from this to that. They will make the change happen. We don't have to create the public relations boards to make that happen.
You can demonstrate effectiveness so much better, I think, on that type of individual scale. No offense to education, but effectiveness is not being measured very well.
It's not being
clearly.
They don't measure effectiveness effectively.
Yes, exactly. Because we know that direct instruction is effective. We had studies long ago to demonstrate that.
We knew it in the 60s.
Like you said, it's all been thrown out. But we're all smiling because Rob wants to do an episode on direct instruction so badly. And he keeps getting kicked down.
Keep putting it for vote
to
some listeners, and it just it gets like a vote. Like no one wants to hear about it. Maybe now that they know, no, your future wealth is tied to direct instruction. You have to know about.
I really think it could be. I really think that could be a thing. I don't know. I'm not I don't have an MBA or anything, but I can't imagine behavior analysts not knocking that out of the park in that kind of tutorial arrangement with kids who are struggling.
One point that you bring up, kind of especially talking about the idea of, the tutoring center for direct instruction, I find one of the patterns that I see a lot because I work in education as my day job, is, I'll read some kind of weak research or a book that's sort of written for the mainstream, and you're reading, you're like, this book is nice, or this is sweet. And then you'll get to the kernels of ideas. You say, these are great ideas. And they're just basic principles of human behavior. They're just basic behavior analytic principles that have been researched, have been written about much more fluently, even written about much more eloquently. But because of the way it was packaged or the way it was marketed, it sounds like no one's ever talked about this ever before. And I, the author, or I, the person who's selling this service, am the first person to think of this way to get children more engaged in their learning, or to help parents, support good discipline systems at home. Are we in danger of trying to, in looking for meaningful variety for our field, pulling the lever of how do I make a quick buck by repackaging real science as real product? I mean, is that a concern that we should be thinking about in variety? I mean, I would be concerned about it just from the idea of competence of, well, I read a couple of papers on direct instruction and I know a guy who will give me a loan. So, how bad could it be? Right. I mean, are we going to water down our field, or is this going to come back to sort of bite us in the future? Is it can only help? That would be one of my concerns there. Is it about, does it become about the marketing? I mean, or the pseudoscience, sprinkled throughout the real science?
First, I don't know. Second, variety. We probably need some moonshot people out there who are going to go, I'm going to make it happen. Like the Steve Jobs of behavior analysis. I don't actually have the technology ready, but I'm telling you, by the end of the year, your kid's going to be at Harvard, right? Holy shit, let's try to make this happen. And if all the people doing it were that person, we'd be in some trouble. We also need some cautious people at the university starting their little tutoring clinic, for free, putting some things out there and seeing what works. This might not be true, or it's probably not true in all cases anyways. I think the packaging and the marketing matters a lot less when you have something that works. I think there's probably some proportional relation, inverse relation. The less effective something is, the more you need to market it, package it, right? And worry about that. The more effective it is, no one cares really at the end of the day what you're talking about. In the early days when Lovaas had his clinic first at UCLA and then privately, I don't know that you can look back at Ivar Lovaas and say he was a marketing genius or warm and fuzzy or really, it didn't matter. It just did not matter. Now it can help, right, to further advance it. But I think the problem becomes when we actually don't have solutions, or at least not robust solutions. Now it's all about, is it the language that people like and everything else? Maybe that's not true. That's sort of the way that I interpret it.
I mean, I do think effectiveness is important, but you also have to get people to access the services, first of all, to determine their effectiveness. So in some areas, reputationally, I think we're working against the current for our field, and we do have to figure out how to get some initial level of interest in order to then demonstrate that what we offer is not only effective, but also socially valid.
I mean, I know if I were starting, the direct instruction tutoring institute, my ads would be very much talking about how, we're harnessing the power of science of brain learning. I'd be very much talking about how the brain learns. I wouldn't be talking about we're harnessing the power of applied behavior analysis. I think that would send the wrong message. Whereas people like to talk about brains. I think that was in some of Tom Critchfield's writings. People love it. If you're talking about a brain, they love it. It makes them really happy. Would you exactly be lying? No. A brain is involved in human behavior, right? So, I might be thinking about it that way. I don't think I'd be marketing into the sense of, lots of laser graphics, but I'd probably be thinking about my words. And I don't know if I would be as upfront about how this tutoring program is based in the principles of behavior analysis versus maybe some other kind of snappier sounding phrases. I don't want to throw my field under the bus, but I think that would get more butts in the seats to start off.
It might, but maybe one better way to do it, because of the costs associated at first, could be for people in academic settings to start these clinics, these little tutoring centers for free for the purposes of their research program. And that's an easier sell, because if you tell the community around your university, here we have a tutoring center run by highly trained, credentialed psychologists, professionals, and it's free. You can come here after school with your kid, and we're going to work with them. If you're successful and their kids improve, they're going to tell people about that, and more people are going to come. That helps the person who tries to do it for a living, right? Because now you've got a model that you can use based on this, but the people who started didn't have to have skin in the game. They didn't have to make a living doing it. They did it from a research perspective to build an evidence base about what's best. Because one thing that does concern me, and again, if some people do this, it's okay. This is the variety thing. We assume that we already know how to do it. So we're going to open the company. I don't believe we know how to do it yet. Now, I don't think you can always proceed cautiously from the laboratory, right? I'm not sure that's going to work. You need some bold people to say, no, you know what? I know enough. I'm pretty sure I'm going to do it better than anybody else is doing it right now. And I'm going to work on it, and it's going to get even better over time. If we have some people doing that, that's great. As long as we also have some people back in the lab working along and helping to produce that evidence base, right? We probably need the dorky scientist only publishing in Java, and we also need the savvy, YouTube sensation person who's speaking. We need all of that. The problem is going to be if we have only one kind, right? If we only have the shoot for the stars entrepreneur, yeah, I think we could be in trouble because they're going to be making huge claims and huge promises and we don't fulfill them. If we only have the quiet, mousy scientist in the lab at, Western Michigan University, no one's going to hear about them beyond Wood Hall. And so that's what I mean. I'm getting back to the variety thing. We don't need one approach. We need more people doing more things. And then I think it becomes maybe less annoying to people. So, for example, I won't name the colleagues, but I've got colleagues. And a lot of times people think this is me. This is not me. They're saying, oh, master's level behavior analysts suck. The problem with the field is we have this huge growing body of master's level behavior analysts, and they're poorly trained, and they're not good scientists, and they don't know how to do. People are making those arguments. I don't think that's the problem. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that a master's level behavior analyst is a well-trained scientist, critically analyzing everything and being able to make those decisions. I think the anger is misdirected. The real thing that you're angry about when you're making those statements is that we don't have more basic researchers and applied researchers at the PhD level at universities and other institutions doing high-level research. No one should be concerned that we have tens of thousands of master's level BCBAs. That's awesome. The problem is the other part of the field is not proportional. But that's a different problem. That's not get angry at the master's level BCBAs and criticize them for their training and what they do. That's figure out how you get more people doing these other things that you see missing. If we don't have that, then the things that go wrong at the level of the master's level practitioner become more glaring, become more annoying, right? But that's a problem of proportion, I think, and a lack of variety. Don't criticize those people. They're doing their thing, right? The rat is always right. That's what they're into. That's what they're doing. Hopefully, most of them are doing it well. That's not their problem that we don't have people studying schedules of reinforcement with pigeons in the laboratory. That's a whole different problem. We don't have to blame the BCBAs for that problem.
So, I mean, I think we've talked about a couple, very, very, heady and at least at this exact moment, fully answerable sort of areas to be looking at in the future. So, I mean, when we're kind of planning out, in those planning stages of how do we keep this field going? I mean, would it help, do you think, Matt, if folks kind of stopped thinking about themselves as I'm a behavior analyst and I'm trying to break into the field of XYZ, and more I'm going to get into a field XYZ and I also happen to be a behavior analyst? I mean, do you think that differentiation is a relevant topic? I know for me, I've spent so many years thinking about how, because unlike, Diana and Jackie, I did special education. Then I went back and did the coursework to sit for my certification exam. And, maybe it's because I'm now, in a podcast where we have to disseminate and discuss research deeply and answer big questions. I'm like, I wish I had done a little bit more of that in my study. But then part of me says, you know what, I should probably also then be proud of the level of knowledge I have about education that neither of my co-hosts have, because that's what I wanted to do. And I still do, a huge chunk of my life is about education. But I also feel like I spent a lot of years feeling bad for myself. Like, oh, I'm not really a behavior analyst. I'm an educator who knows some stuff about human behavior. Maybe that was the right attitude. Maybe if I doubled down on that attitude, I'd be, the superintendent of behavior for, Massachusetts right now. I mean, who knows?
You're just promoting yourself all over the place.
I know. Well, if I could promote myself, I'd be the king of ABA. We all know, but it's not the job that's applicable right now.
I'm going to make you a badge.
I mean, is that a relevant distinction? I mean, should we be saying, hey, grad students, you want to pick a field where you're going to bring the knowledge that you're great at, that you're bringing your knowledge of behavior analysis to it? Or should we be saying, I'm teaching you to be the best behavior analyst and now go find a job and you can sort of smoosh them together later? I mean, is one better than the other, do you think? Or the kind of...
I think you know my answer at this point, right? Anybody who approaches the field from anywhere and is intrigued, we should welcome and engage, reinforce successive approximations, and that's wonderful. And if someone from, I don't know, if a physician comes in and they end up with a fairly remedial, kind of superficial understanding of the field, but they're using some basic things, that's fabulous. We shouldn't be concerned about that. That's a win. If that's all we had, we'd be in trouble, right? So should we also be encouraging the folks who are in our field and our training programs to think maybe more broadly? Yeah, we certainly should be teaching them. And hopefully, as we were talking earlier, putting them in touch with some resources to help them develop, whether it's coursework or internships in those different areas. We should be doing all of those things. We would be in a bad place if we only had people in those diverse areas with superficial knowledge of behavior analysis. You're seeing that like in the contingency management policies. Then that little bit of knowledge probably isn't enough. We're also not going to get very far if all we have are rigorously trained behavior analysts with that hat on, knocking on the doors at schools and hospitals and everything else. That's what I mean about variety. So I don't think you have to only pick one. I mean, maybe practically, maybe you're in a graduate training program and you decide this is our mission. That can be very successful and may be necessary. It's like, no, we're doing hardcore behavior analysis. When you come here, that's the training that you get. Another program might be very open, right? And it's like, we want to make sure you're getting the building blocks here, but really this is a public health program, right? And so you've got to learn public health, but we're going to try to infuse as much basic behavioral principles as possible. I can see that working. But as our big field of behavior analysis, we have to do all of that. We have to encourage it. And I think go with what works. Be opportunistic, right? If what you're getting is an influx of people who are of this kind, focus on doing the best you can with that. I think it tends to lean sort of in your direction, right? That's where people come from. So I sort of hope that programs that have an opportunity to double down on the experimental analysis of behavior and the hardcore stuff do that, because I think there are fewer of those. So when we get that opportunity, I think we should capitalize and make it happen if we can. We have more opportunities, I think, in that other realm. But our field is going to be better if we do all of those things.
Before we get to wrap up, I know, Matt, you brought up a number of fields where you'd say like behavior analysis is kind of the closest to sort of hitting that mainstream and the people come to the field rather than we have to market to ourselves. Jackie and Diana, looking at Heward and colleagues, 350 areas where there's at least some work in behavior analysis. Did you look through that list and say one of like, this is the one I would, if I could go back and redo my whole career, this is where I would have, doubled down and done all the research? Was there like an area that you were like, I hope that someone's done research on this and you looked and you found or you didn't find it? Because it was a pretty elaborate list. I think it was a part of our discussion today, but I think very surface level in terms of just variety of like, if everyone could just publish one article with 2 subjects, we're not going to get very far. But was there an area in there that you looked for to see? I wonder if anyone's done work in this area. I'm
really especially interested in partnering with early childhood pediatricians. And I have a child, and I frequently, every well visit, I'm like, so need any collaboration with the BCBA? She's also pregnant. She's had lots of children as well. And she's always like, well, I'm pregnant this time, but next time ask me. And I'm going to continue asking her every well visit, every year. I've even called the office and be like, I'm free to do some collaboration with you and to chat. I think it would be awesome to have a behavior analyst on staff at a pediatrician office, right? So that then they can help with all of the common problems that parents have with feeding and sleeping. And if there is some deficits, like get in there early, like have someone that can help, because pediatricians are general, right? They know a lot of things, but sometimes they might miss on those, they'll be like, oh, they're fine, right? Wait. And then it gets, so that was the area that I was like, I wish I did more there. And so maybe in my mid to late life, that's what I'll do. I'll retire and then go like sit in the pediatrician office in the waiting room, just waiting for her to come out.
I kind of agree, Jay. I know I think it was in Friman's article, and I think you mentioned in your article too, they had Edward Christopherson, who just sort of like built up the field of behavioral pediatrics seemingly by himself. I wanted to sort of drop everything, like, I want to read about this guy. Like, how did this come about? It was just fascinating. Diana, how about you? Anything in there? Did you hit the list and say, I hope they did research on blank and find it, not find it?
I think the area of sustainability to me is very interesting, and it's a lot of work to try to get research done in that capacity, as I have tried to do it. And then you find yourself or someone, counting trash or weighing trash, right? But there are a variety of things you could do in that area that could have an impact, and counting trash is probably one of the least effective ways, honestly, of getting into doing actual sustainability work. So I'm interested to think bigger picture about the types of inroads that we could make and demonstrate effectiveness that will produce policy change.
I agree that, counting trash probably isn't going to make the biggest difference. On the other hand, though, if that's what you could get some students doing and be successful at changing behavior, that might be a bootstrap way. So I would say we shouldn't get rid of that. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of people, these changes that have to be made to address climate change are big societal changes, policy level changes, but we're not there yet. So should we do nothing? Or should we do something? As long as we understand that what we're doing is not the answer. We are not the sustainability expert or savior now, because we know how to increase placement of, recyclable items in the recycle bin. No, but that's not irrelevant. It's just, it's not the end of the story. I actually, before we wrap up, one of the things that I wanted to discuss, because it's also part of that sort of video motivation, it has to do with that second part of variety, which is within our field. And this is something that I've evolved my viewpoint on over the years. And I think people still think I'm the cranky critic. To some extent I am. But within our field, I think we need to stop beating each other up and eating our young. And we need variety in terms of what people are doing. So I'm going to name some things. Not people, I'll name some things. I think many people anyways know I'm not a big fan of relational frame theory and things like that. And then, but I think what people then assume is, oh, you don't think that's behavior analysis, it shouldn't be done, those people aren't real behavior. What? Where does that come from? I'm not enamored. I'm not that I don't appreciate that we respond to more than, less than, bluer than, pinker than, all of that stuff. I think, the evidence for how that emerges and what's actually going on and how robust a phenomenon and whether it sort of is a defining feature of language or requires language to really see these relations. That's what I quibble about. But I view that sort of like in biology, right? Evolutionary biologists argue about the details, the minutia of what's happening. That's what we're arguing about, right? We agree on 99.9% of everything. We differ here, right? If we go to a meeting of the American Psychological Association and I walk into a room and I'm looking for someone to sit next to, and Steve Hayes is in there, I'm going to go sit next to Steve Hayes because that's who I have almost everything in common with in that room, right? That's who I'm going to be able to talk to. So as a field, am I going to do RFT research? No. Am I going to teach my students to do RFT research? No. Does that mean that no one should? No. I think it would be a problem if that's all we had. I also think it's a problem that we seem not to be able to disagree with each other and criticize without all of a sudden being placed in an in-group or an out-group, which seems to be happening a lot now. Criticism, some people said, well, what we really need to do is we need to focus on the similarities of what we're doing. Well, that's one part of science. That's the SD condition. You also need the S-delta condition, where you need to very clearly articulate what's different about these conditions that make them different. So we need to be able to do that stuff and still be with each other. Do you know what I mean? Another thing that I'm not a huge fan of, and the people who do this work, I think, know this already, and some I talk to a lot about it, there's a lot of the hypothetical delay discounting research going on, right? I don't buy it for the most part. I don't think it's entirely irrelevant, and I think in the grander collection of data with direct measures of actual behavior in real settings and maybe self-report data that corroborate, all that stuff would be a strong picture of a certain phenomenon. I am not going to do that kind of research. I'm not convinced. I'm not persuaded. That is not the same thing as saying Derek Reed should not do that research. He should. He has been. He should, and we should be able to talk about it. And we do. I've had many conversations with him about it. Again, we agree on 99.9% of our science, and that's way more than almost anybody else in psychology agrees with us, right? We are arguing about the details of our science in practice. We should be able to do that, and we need to do that. I should be able to vigorously argue against the use of hypothetical discounting tasks. And the people who use them then should be arguing back, right? Because I need to address their challenges and answers as much as they need to address mine. That's how it gets better, right? That's how science is going to advance. And we're all human beings, so we can't take that out of it, and we're going to get annoyed and angry. But hopefully you can step back and say, okay, not attacking the person. I'm attacking what they said or what they wrote, right? Let's continue to do that. And so others have argued, we need to be kind, though. We need to be encouraging. Some of us do. If everybody was a jerk and just laser-like attack, we wouldn't get anywhere. But you know what? We need some of those people, too. We need some people who are making extravagant claims about the post-Skinnerian world and that this is revolutionary and that ACT will fix everything in the world. Okay? If everybody was doing that, we'd be in some trouble. We also need people who are saying, that's the most ridiculous thing ever. There's no basis to that. If everybody did that, we wouldn't get anywhere either. Do you know what I mean? But those people should be coexisting at the same conference, in the same journals, and everything else within reason. And that's, right now in my career, that's the variety I'm most interested in. And I'm hopefully about halfway through my professional life, I think. Maybe a little bit more, unfortunately. But if I'm doing well, maybe halfway through. I really want to spend the rest of my professional life reading Skinner and really appreciating the implications there. I'm not saying everybody should do that. I get Skinner's not with us anymore. He's not a deity. What he wrote is not the word of God, right? But the insight that was there, we need some people who deal in that. I'm at a point, I spent the first part of my career about dissemination. We need to read this and read that and be in other fields and do that stuff. And I did that. Okay. I don't know that I want to read other fields that much anymore, to be honest with you. I think people should. They should do that, and they might have different outcomes. I am not interested anymore. I haven't found all that much useful. I am very much interested in, actually, I'm reading papers from the 1930s, 1940s. If everybody did that, we would be in a world of trouble. But that's kind of where I am. I'm really intrigued by some things that we never fleshed out, that go back to some of those early things. And we need people doing that. That doesn't make us bad people, I don't think. Like, oh, you're stuck in the past. Get beyond Skinner. No, I hope some people do. I really do. And right now, for me, I don't want to. I'm into that. Dave Palmer is my idol. Do you know what I mean? I think Dave appreciates Skinner more than anybody else. So I just wanted to get that out there because that really was, for me, one of the main reasons to start talking about variety as the spice of our professional life. If we only had people doing one thing one way, we would be dead in the water. So we need that. Now, one of the questions got at this. Hopefully the best things end up being selected in the broad level of selection by consequences. But of course, what makes something effective can take a whole variety of forms. So it might mean that we solve the problem, but it might also mean that people just like talking about this thing. It's reinforcing to talk to others in this way about this, even if the problem doesn't get any better. That started people talking.
My marketing scheme worked.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a perfect process, and it's not necessarily going to work out in our lifetime, that the right answers always stay at the top, but it's kind of how the system works. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. If we really figure out a solution to something, it's not going to matter the language we use to describe it. If we make the problem obviously better on a consistent basis, that's what people will end up doing, at least if it's a problem that really matters. I'm fairly confident in that, but you've got to take the longer horizon. And that means there'll be self-report, hypothetical, discounting task, research published. That might turn out to be what we need. I don't know. I am not invested in that. Other people can be, and that's okay. And we should be able to talk about that and argue about that in our field. So,
all right. Well, let's move into the last section of our show, the dissemination station. And, unless you just skipped ahead to the dissemination station part of the episode, this is usually the part of the show where we, what are our next steps? And this isn't a conversation where it's going to be, and here's how we'll solve this problem tomorrow. So instead, Matt, I'd like to ask you, you said you're kind of, about halfway through, you're at a different part in your career now. Let's go to the future. And you're nearer to the end of you're almost at the end of your career. You want to do a follow-up post about variety, that's enough variety, no more variety, right? What would that look like? What would this, hypothetical future situation for behavior analysis look like if you were able to say, all right, everybody, we did it, done, that's enough variety, we can stop now, we don't need to talk about this ever again? Like, what might that world be like?
So can I be really idealistic?
Of course you can, yeah.
Like would be, where we should have been all along.
Whether I was the king in your scenario or not, whichever way it went.
I think we would have no more behavior analysis. We wouldn't have an ism. I think what it would mean is we would have a coherent discipline of psychology, and we would be the foundation of that discipline. And so when students took introduction to psychology, like when they take introduction to biology, the first 6 chapters are about basic behavioral principles. Always. That's just a given. There could be, a sort of variety of ideas about more complex phenomenon that we don't have empirical evidence for, but they all have to include the role of these basic behavioral principles before considering other things. And that was Skinner's notion when he referred to them as facts in the bag. And this is the problem I have with most of what you would read in psychology or related disciplines. They don't ever include what could be going on in terms of respondent and operant learning before their theories. So I know they're wrong. They cannot be right. I don't have to read anything more about what they're saying because those are facts in the bag and they have to be part of the explanation. They might not be the whole explanation. I don't really believe that. I don't know what else there could be, but that's because maybe we haven't discovered it yet. So that's my ideal world, would just be we go to APA, the American Psychological Association meeting. That's where we live, right? And those of us who are doing most of the things we do now are like the first 6 chapters of the book. We're the people who are doing the research on the foundational principles of our science of psychology. And then there's a lot of other people trying to make sense of stuff that we simply don't have answers to yet. And we're just trying to understand maybe conceptually at this point. That would be ideal to me, that we don't identify as an ism or anything else. We're just part of it.
Okay. That is quite a future. And I think we all would agree that that would be quite a nice future, at least in terms of how we've decided to devote our professional careers. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking about this topic. I think, I appreciate how much work you did ahead of time in some of the emails, because I know when I first started thinking about it, I was like, we're going to talk more about how to get into different jobs. And I am so excited that we talked about a heck of a lot more than how to become a behavior analyst or BCBA who just happens to also have a second career in child care administration. So thank you very much for bringing the topic this week to a very complicated and very important place.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to rant and ramble here. I'm interested in this, and I've not yet written anything about it, talked about it a little bit. So it's an opportunity to explore this, and maybe at some point you can actually, post a paper about it that has some anchored talking points or something.
And Matt, if folks want to email you either to talk about this topic or any of the other work that you publish on, is there contact information that they could reach out to you?
The easiest way to do it, I've stolen the brand, is www.theskinnerbox.com. You can get my social media links. You can get recent publications, my email address. It's even the license plate of my car, so you can find me on the road. It's Skinnerbox. Theskinnerbox.com.
We want to thank Dr. Matthew Norman for coming on the show and talking to us all about this very needed, but also very, complicated topic. As much as it was exciting to talk about, I think I wouldn't mind if we just started talking about how to get into a new field, right? That's a little bit of a simpler 2 or 3 answer topic, but we went into one that has no definitive answer, but I think we came up with some great ideas and great thoughts about the future for the field. And I hope that these also spur you on to have even more of your own thoughts and discussions with your colleagues, because again, that is the point of our show. I want to wrap us up with a couple things. First off, I want to make sure everyone gets the second secret code word that they need if they'd like to purchase CEs. And that is, again, from special guest Dr. Norman, Van Halen, VANHALEN. You can do it properly as 2 words with a capital V and a capital H, or you can do it as one smushed together, all lowercase word. Whatever it is, it's the 80s band. The late legendary lead guitarist, Eddie Van Halen, was a great band back in the 80s. I don't know too many of their songs. Panama, you probably know that one, right? Anyway, that's our code word, Van Halen. In addition to thanking Dr. Norman for being on the show today, I want to make sure to thank Jackie and Diana for always helping out with these amazing conversations that we get to have. And of course, to thank you, the listener, for listening to our show. We'd really appreciate it if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. Hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe and get even more ABA Inside Track content? If you want to reach out to Dr. Norman, you can go to his webpage, theskinnerbox.com. If you want to reach out to us, you can go to our page, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all our social media, to find a list of all of the episodes we've ever done, as well as to find links to all of the articles discussed in this episode and our previous episodes, and a place to purchase CEs for almost all of the episodes we've done on the show. If you want even more ABA Inside Track content, you can check us out at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where we have seasonal releases of our long form book club podcast for folks who subscribe at the $10 and up level. You can get 2 CEs for listening to those at no additional charge. As of the release of this episode, we have just recorded our discussion of street data for our summer topic on equity, a discussion of ways to collect useful information about students in the public schools that go beyond big data. That's street data, but it's only available for our Patreon subscribers, as well as access to all of the previous book clubs we've done on memoirs, such as Look Me in the Eye, or behavioral economics literature like Nudge, or like our episode today, forward-thinking science discussion on human behavior like The Nurture Effect. Again, that's at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. If that's too much, you can always subscribe at our $3 or $5 levels to get access to special live episodes that we do seasonally, as well as some other bonuses and discounts at our CE store. Again, patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Some final thanks. We cannot do the show without Dr. Jim Carr's fabulous recording of our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry's fabulous interstitial music, and of course, Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctor's amazing editing work. Thank you all. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. Until then, keep responding. Bye!